Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. This is our next solo conversation in our 300th episode milestone series, What It Takes to Keep Rising in the AI Era. Last month, I released a series opener, a combined episode with all 6 experts in this milestone series. So if you haven't listened to that, make sure to check that out after this conversation. So 300 conversations in, and one pattern has become clear. The leaders who keep rising in this AI era are not the ones with the fanciest tools, but the ones who change how they think and work with those tools. In this episode, I sit down with Whitney Johnson, one of the world's leading experts on personal growth and disruption. Whitney is a Thinkers 50 Top 10 management thinker and the former co-founder of the Disruptive Innovation Fund with the late Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen. She's also a best-selling author of 2 books, Disrupt Yourself and Smart Growth. At the center of Whitney's work is a powerful idea. Growth follows an S-curve. We begin slowly, accelerate as learning compounds, and eventually reach mastery, where competence and comfort can quietly become a plateau. That framework has never been more relevant. AI can help us work faster, produce more, and create better-looking results, but it can also make it harder to see whether we are still developing the capabilities beneath that output. Her subject is the question every one of us eventually faces. How do we keep climbing? How do we jump to a new curve before comfort quietly becomes a plateau? Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm Charles Good. This show is built for leaders, managers, and high achievers who want to think better, grow faster, and perform under pressure. Each episode, I sit down with leading researchers, best-selling authors, and experts to uncover what actually works, the practical tools, proven strategies, and insights you can use when the pressure is real. Because in a world that keeps changing, the edge belongs to those who can outlearn what worked yesterday, outthink what's coming next, and outperform when it counts. Welcome to the program, Whitney.
Charles, wow, that is, you have a radio. Have you done radio, or is it just that you've done 300 podcasts?
I think I've just done 300 podcasts.
Impressive. Very impressive.
So Whitney, why do you think so many smart, committed leaders are working harder than ever before right now, but feeling less confident about their future than they did, say, 5 to 10 years ago?
Great. All right. So as I think about that question, I kind of want to reframe this. I'm not sure that people are actually feeling less confident. I would say that the entire workforce is at the launch point of a new S-curve, like not just the entire workforce, but the entire world. And the emotional signature of that is that people feel the sense of excitement and possibility, but they also feel terrified and overwhelmed and impatient and like an imposter. And so I don't know that people are necessarily feeling less confident. They're just having and experiencing the weather at the launch point. And we're seeing that certainly in our work is there's a lot of demand for helping people navigate the human side of disruption. It's not so much that they're struggling with the technology, it's just the feelings that they're having around that change and the identity. What does their identity look like inside of that? Like if I'm not who I was and I'm not yet who I will be, who am I and how do I navigate that within AI? And I think what's exciting or interesting is that both things are true. So people are feeling incredibly disoriented possibly in a way that they never have, but at the same time, they're feeling incredibly exuberant and excited about the possibility that AI brings. I think about just something simple like my Whoop. My Whoop allows me to get so much data about my sleep, my recovery, et cetera. And so there's the possibility for us to change and develop as human beings exponentially. And so again, I don't know that people are feeling less confident. I think it's just that we're all in this place of doing something new and navigating both the terror and the thrill of doing that new thing.
I love that framing of it, Whitney. You're right. And just to give our listeners some insight into the S-curve, it happens with any new role or skill. It follows 3 macro phases, right? The launch point, the slow and awkward phase, that sweet spot, which can be fast and exhilarating, and then that mastery phase, which is slow again, and boredom and plateau happens during that time as well. Is there anything else that you can unpack for our listeners regarding the S-curve story and how that growth happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting about the S-curve is it's something that's been around for decades. And it was originally popularized by Everett Rogers back in the 1960s. And he was using it to understand how do groups change over time? We then used it at the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Clayton Christensen to look at how quickly an innovation would be adopted, because that's how groups are changing, obviously. But then I had the insight that you could use the S curve to understand how do individuals change? And more importantly, what does growth look like? And what does it feel like? And so if you think about the launch point, that what feels slow but is actually fast phase, and because it feels slow and the growth isn't apparent, people feel uncomfortable and awkward like you've just described. In the sweet spot, they feel the sense of exhilaration because growth is fast and it feels fast. And in mastery, they feel like an expert, but they also feel restless and bored because they're not getting dopamine. And so one of the reasons that I emphasize so much the importance of what does it feel like to be at each stage of that S curve is, especially when you're at the launch point, as Dr. Dan Siegel said, if you can name it, you can tame it. So if you can say, I'm doing this new thing and I'm I'm scared right now, then your brain says, "Oh, I don't need to detect the threat response. I now know what the threat is. I can now tame it." And so all the cognitive capacity it was going to try to get rid of the threat can now give way to the executive functioning skills so you can start to problem solve. So that's why the S curve becomes very important, is it allows people to articulate the feelings that they're feeling, which then allows them to move through the growth faster and not be in a place of fear but a place of hope.
Thank you for unpacking that. And I think what AI to me is doing is muffling the jump signal, because this is where that declining performance and boredom used to force the jump. AI keeps the output high now through the plateau. So the one signal that used to push people onto a new curve never fires, and people stay there too long. And somewhere in them, they kind of know it, but they just aren't jumping when they should.
Hmm. That's interesting, an interesting observation that you think that it muffles when you're at the top of that S curve. What I would say is that it can potentially get muffled because there's so much data and information that we can start to be confused about what we're actually feeling versus what maybe the machine tells us we should be feeling. I think that the challenge for people is a willingness to say, I'm actually feeling restless. I'm actually feeling bored. It's not like that I don't like my job. It's not that I don't like the people that I work with. It's just that I need to continue to do new things. And the beauty of right now, it's the beauty and the bane, is that if you aren't willing to disrupt yourself and you're not willing to do something new, something's going to come along and going to disrupt you instead. So you're going to be forced to change. Well, you're not going to be forced to. You will be pushed off a curve and then you get to make a decision. Are you going to use your agency and disrupt yourself to move through this? Or are you just going to be overcome by the disruption? You know, throw down your toys and go home kind of thing. Well, ideally, you're going to pick up your toys and build something.
Absolutely. And the other part really I see too with the AI is the first part of the curve where you have to build up the expertise and the learning. And now people are kind of not wanting to wait any longer for that because they have great output. But the expertise has never really been built underneath. So I see that as an issue as well with many, that they haven't built it over time like they used to. And that could really hurt them long term in various ways.
I agree. I think the AI really tempts us to skip the slow part. That slow part, the launch point of the curve, where you're really wrestling with an idea and thinking through something, skipping the discomfort, just going straight to the fun part and skipping the growth. But to your point, if you don't actually ever if you don't know how to wrestle with the process of learning, then you're really going to be in trouble, because then the machine really will take over. But if you can continue in that place of learning and knowing how to grow and develop, then and that muscle stays strong, then again, AI just allows you to 10x or 100x who you already are.
I wanted to also ask you regarding in this AI era, then what do you think still compounds for a leader and what's most at risk of being lost?
So I remember a few years ago hearing Alan Mulally and Jim Kim tell a story. So Jim Kim was formerly the president of the World Bank, and Alan Mulally was formerly the president of Ford. And when Jim became the president of the World Bank, he asked Alan for advice. And Alan's a really smart guy. He's an engineer by training. He built airplanes, and he said to Jim, "You have a nice smile. You should smile more." It's like, what? But basically, the idea is that when you're a leader, your face isn't yours anymore. People are going to read it like a weather vane. So if you're smiling, if you're frowning, whatever. And so I think that's going to continue to compound. Trust is going to compound, character will compound, people learning that they can rely on what they see. Um, I also think it's interesting. I had this experience just a couple of weeks ago, and I think this is something that starts to go at risk. I was looking at business development and I crafted this really impressive email with the help of AI and ready to get it sent it out. And I had a colleague look at it and they're like, that's a very nice email, but Whitney, why don't you just pick up the phone? Like, yeah, I guess I could do that. I think it starts to become at risk because, if you have any tendency to hide, and I think we all do have some tendencies to hide, maybe not everybody, but most of us, you can manufacture a lot, not say anything, not have your presence show up. And so that becomes at risk. And yet, because it's at risk, it becomes even more valuable. And so who you are compounds faster and the risks compound faster. But if you can find a way to be more present and be more human, that is going to compound, I think, in some ways even more because knowledge is actually quite cheap.
We no longer live in the age where access to knowledge is hard to get to. We are inundated by information each and every day. Wanted to get your insights on this because I feel what compounds right now is the capacity to keep disrupting yourself. I believe learning agility is the meta skill of the next generation because every curve you climb makes you better at climbing the next one. You get faster through that awkward launch, more tolerant of incompetence, and more skilled at learning itself. So the serial disruptor, self disruptor, builds the one capability that survives every technological wave.
I could not have said it better. Boom, and the interview. Well said. I completely agree, and I think that goes to this idea of the only way through a disruption is to disrupt yourself, is your ability to learn, to grow, develop, to change. And I think the thing that I would add is that the challenge is that the older someone gets, the more they have insulated them from doing new things, and so that ability to serially disrupt themselves can get pretty flaccid. And so when you're younger, you have to do what your parents want you to do and what your teachers want you to do. You're still pretty good at disrupting yourself. So the question for anybody who's like over the age of, let's call it over the age of 40, are you keeping that muscle of disrupting yourself? Are you going and lifting weights?
Well, like what you said too, that's really the risk is the willingness to enter that discomfort of a new curve because the bottom of the S curve, like we talked about a few minutes ago, is slow, awkward, and humbling. But that's where growth actually lives. And AI makes it feel now optional. Why be bad at something when the machine makes you instantly competent? But like you remind the listeners and the readers of your books, you skip the discomfort and you skip the growth. You get the output, but you don't get the learning along with it.
Yeah, it's interesting too that you're saying that because that certainly is true in a knowledge worker environment. But one of the things that I know that I do, and I have the benefit of like, I talk about change management and literacy for a living. So I have to walk my talk. But, just a couple weeks ago, I was delivering a lecture on change management and they said, hey, as part of this experience, we're going to go rappelling and mountain biking and whitewater rafting. Do you want to come with us? And I'm like, no, I don't. But yes, I do because I needed to have that experience of doing things that I'm really bad at. And like you said, it's very humbling. But every time you do that thing that you're not good at, and it doesn't even need to be something that dramatic. Maybe it can be just, I'm going to figure out how to use my car, whatever. Just that willingness to do new things and step into that place of, I actually don't know how to do this, but I'm going to trust that I can figure it out, which goes back to the learning agility that you mentioned.
Well, then I'm curious too to see if you have any insights around how long does that phase usually last? Because that long middle phase where you're not seeing any progress, right? It's just the learning's compounding in the background. There's different analogies. And one I like is from Hemingway. It happens gradually until it happens all at once. But are there signals? Are there signs that would indicate you're moving in the right direction? The learning's compounding, but maybe the boiling point hasn't been reached yet for the acceleration to happen.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that I will look at is when you're on the launch point of the curve and you're looking at this place and you're like, this is feeling really awkward right now. Does this actually make sense for me to stay here, or is it the wrong curve and I should cut my losses? There are some questions that I'll ask people to ask themselves. Number one is, are you playing where other people aren't playing? So this goes back to disruption theory, meaning is there an actual lane for you, or are you just taking on pure all out competitive risk, which means you're going to have to be way better than everybody else? Is this something that you're doing that plays to something that you do uniquely well? Like it really does play to your strengths. The third thing is to ask yourself, are you building momentum? So is there starting to be a product, or person S curve fit that allows you to say, I think it makes sense to stay here. And then the fourth question that I oftentimes will suggest people ask is, ask people around you that you trust, not someone not always a partner or a spouse, because they might have a vested interest in you not doing this new thing, but someone like a mentor or a teacher who says, I really do see you doing this. I think it makes sense to stick with it. So those are some things that you can ask yourself to help yourself persist. And the reason that those are so important is because when you're feeling so uncomfortable, sometimes you can say to yourself, well, I don't know, I have a bad feeling about this. And you think that there's your gut, or it might even be God is telling you you shouldn't be doing this, when the only thing that's actually happening is you're just feeling really uncomfortable and you don't have enough data to know if this makes sense or not.
Love that. Thank you for providing that insight. Well, everything so far is the framework you teach others, the curve, the jump, the discomfort. So I want to turn the lens around. And I don't think anyone builds a body of work on self disruption without having been disrupted themselves, probably painfully on more than one occasion. So looking back on your career, what's the one realization that genuinely changed how you work, and how long did it take you to truly internalize it?
Yeah, I love that question so much. Yes, I've been disrupted a lot. I mean, I started in music and then went to Wall Street and, I've lost my job, lots of disruptions. So I definitely am getting lots of practice in what I'm preaching. But to your question specifically, it's interesting. So Clayton, the work that I had done with Clayton Christensen around disruption, and then of course I adapted it to think about it's not about products and services and companies and countries, it's about people. So he gave me this notion of what is disruption and what is personal disruption. The big difference with personal disruption is you're the disruptor and the incumbent. So you are disrupting you. But there became this big gap because I had been writing about this and teaching about this, and probably 5 or 7 years into this. So this is now like 15 years ago. And a fellow by the name of Bob Proctor, and you may have heard of him. He was a person who focused a lot on human potential. He wrote a book called You Were Born Rich. He died a couple years ago. He was in his late 80s, kind of the generation before Tony Robbins. And we were on a panel together, and he pulled me aside after the panel was over. And he basically said to me, Whitney, you're living below your privileges. It's like, what? And I was realizing that I was teaching personal disruption, but I wasn't quite internalizing it. And he would tell this story about elephants that are required to do work in India, and they put these chains around their legs and they put this stake in the ground. And when they're babies, they try to pull them out and they can't. So they just give up. But then when they're adults, they could easily pull it out and they don't. And basically, they don't because they believe that they can't. And so I think that for me, one of the big questions has been, what am I believing about myself that isn't true? Even though I'm saying personal disruption, why am I not necessarily disrupting? And I would say that it's been 10 years and I'm still doing this work, and I probably will do this work until the day that I die, that I'm not just talking about what I know, but I'm trying to live what I know.
I love that. That's powerful insight and lesson. I'm curious too, for those that are on the top of the curve, like you are in your field, you're the expert, and they may feel that their growth is stagnating. And if they stay on that curve too long, it doesn't just stay flat, it starts to decline.
Mhm.
What are some signs, or what's some advice you can give them to say, okay, maybe it's time to jump to a new curve before it starts to go in the opposite direction?
Right. Okay. Well, let me answer that. I'm going to answer two questions on that. So, when one of the ways you can know when you're at the top of an S curve is you start to feel restless or bored. You start to feel like you can say things like, "Oh, I've paid my dues," or "This isn't how we do this here," or you start actually trying to discourage other people around you because you feel like they're competing with you at some level, or you feel like you can also have this feeling of, I feel like there's more for me to do on this planet. I feel like I'm really good at this, but I just can't do this anymore. Those are all signals for you that it makes sense for you to look at doing something new. What I would also say is that this does not necessarily mean that you need to blow up your life. So you can have a portfolio of S curves. No one's on just one curve at work, at home, in the context of your life. When you do get that signal of like, I know I'm good at this, but I can't keep doing this, what you can do is you think about your portfolio of S curves. You say, okay, here's an area where I'm in mastery, but I have some other areas where I'm in the sweet spot. And maybe I can swap out that mastery for a launch point curve. And let me give you a specific example. So I was coaching a leader few years back who was basically in treasury, a CFO function. And she was having the experience of absolutely at mastery. But the company needed her. They didn't want her to leave. She didn't really want to leave. So what they did is they said, all right, we need you to keep doing this S curve, but we're going to give you some support so that you don't need to spend quite as much time on this. And then we're going to have you do some work that's not entirely external facing, do some internal facing work, move you to another country. So now they got the benefit of her expertise, of her area of mastery, but she was also navigating some launch points of living in a new country, learning a new discipline within the function, which allowed her to move back into the sweet spot of her curve overall.
So you can have multiple S curves, personal, professional, and just by moving to a new S curve doesn't mean you have to leave your company or organization, correct?
No, no. In fact, anybody you talk to, and you talk to lots of people, as do I, that's been at a company for 15 or 20 years, they're at that company for 15, 20 years. They can almost without exception trace a series of S curves. So I did this and I got to the top, and then I either chose or I was voluntold, and then I did this and then I did this. They will be able to map out S curves for you.
Love it. So if there's one thing a listener could start doing this week that would still be paying off 5 to 10 years from now, even as AI and their jobs are both changing, what would that be or what would you recommend them start?
Well, I have a couple of suggestions for you. I think the first one would be that most of our calls now that we're, as knowledge workers that we're doing are recorded. So I would encourage people to feed them into AI and ask, how well am I listening? Am I talking over people? You can use AI as this bonus prefrontal cortex as a mirror for your own development. So there's this opportunity for you to 10x or even 100x who you are as a leader, as a human being, if you will use AI to help you evaluate. And the second suggestion I would have for you is you can program your AI to give it some guiding principles. Like your job is not to be a sycophant. You can program it with these are my values, honesty, integrity. I want you to push back on me so that it can really give you feedback that's useful. Don't be God, for example. Don't be an oracle. Give it some guiding principles. Use it to reflect back, to coach you, and then focus on 5% better. Jeff Downs has said the signature of mediocrity is not an unwillingness to change, it's the chronic inconsistency. So, the thing that you can do today is start recording, analyzing your calls, give your AI guidelines that are consistent with your values, and then pick 5% better. And I guess the last thing I would say is that AI is doing amazing work, but it's really important that you do your own work as well of becoming a better human, of dignity, integrity, honesty, etc.
I love that. And I always advocate human first, AI second, use it as a sparring partner. If that person were to do that for about 5 to 10 years, that skill that you described, provide some hope for our listeners as we close. How would they be different from everyone else that's just riding this AI wave, letting AI do more of the work for them? What kind of difference would they experience in their career
Mm,
and in themselves?
Here's what I would say. So I have a financial background, and what I know is that if you invest money, it accumulates and it compounds. Everybody that's listening is probably familiar with James Clear's work about atomic habits. I like to think about 5% better. What I know for sure is that if you are willing to every day listen to one of your calls that you've recorded and ask it for feedback, what did I do well? What should I continue doing? And what's one thing that could look like 5% better, and you do that every single day, the cumulative and compounding effect of that, you can be a person that you can't probably even imagine in 5 years versus who you are today. It just is that willingness, and it doesn't have to be big. It's that 5% because you'll do the 5% every single day. That consistency is going to win every time.
Love that. Great way to end the episode. Thank you so much, Whitney, for joining me. Remind our listeners how they can learn more about you, get in contact with you, and get some of your great books.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so that's an easy way. And you can always reach out to me at wj at thedisruptionadvisors.com if you want to email me. And then I have the Disrupt Yourself podcast. It's currently on pause, but there are 400 episodes, which you can listen to that talk about all sorts of disruptive ideas with really interesting people, not unlike your podcast, the Good Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Whitney, so much for joining me. And thank all of you for listening. Remember, like Whitney said, growth isn't something that happens to us. It's something we choose by climbing down off a comfortable peak and being willing to be a beginner again. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do differently and consistently that makes a difference. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. Remember, great ideas only matter when they change what you do next. So choose one insight from today's conversation and put it into practice this week. If this episode was valuable, follow the show and share it with someone who would benefit. And until next time, remember, the edge belongs to those who outlearned what worked yesterday, who can outthink what's coming next so that they can outperform when it counts.